At my eldest daughter's funeral, her husband walked in holding my younger daughter's hand. He came to me beside the casket, leaned close, and whispered, "Don't worry, Dad. Elaine built something special. Diane and I will take good care of it. And of each other." Then, my daughter's laughter came from inside that casket. Every person left in that chapel went completely still. Marcus stumbled backward into a flower arrangement and knocked it to the floor. Roses everywhere. Nobody moved to pick them up. Welcome, family. Before we go any further, drop a comment and tell me, what are you doing while you listen? Driving somewhere? Folding laundry? Just winding down for the night? Your answer might be exactly what somebody else needed to read today. And just so you know, some details in this story have been changed to protect those involved. What matters is the truth underneath it all. I never expected to bury my daughter before I turned 70. My name is Elaine Calloway. I spent 34 years as a federal magistrate judge in Charleston, South Carolina. I read people for a living, not just the ones in my courtroom, but the lawyers, the witnesses, the family members sitting in the gallery trying to hold themselves together. After 3 decades on that bench, I could tell you within 2 minutes whether someone was lying or telling the truth. The pause before the answer. The hands that go still when a guilty mind takes over. The eyes that look up and to the left, searching for the story they're building instead of the memory they're recalling. I thought that skill protected me. I was wrong. Elaine Calloway-Marsh was 37 years old when they told me she was gone. My eldest daughter, the one who used to sit on the edge of my bench in my home office when she was 9 years old, swinging her feet, asking me to explain every case I was reading. She grew up to run our family's real estate holding company, $12 million in historic coastal properties, stretching from the Battery down to James Island. She had her mother's eyes and her grandfather's stubbornness and a mind that moved 3 steps ahead of everyone else in the room. Marcus Marsh, 44, was her husband of 3 years. He came into our family as a financial advisor with a tailored suit and a handshake that lasted exactly the right amount of time. Not too firm, not too loose. Calculated. He had joined Elaine's company as a strategic consultant 18 months after they married. And somewhere in that arrangement, the balance of power had shifted in ways I hadn't paid close enough attention to. My younger daughter, Diane Calloway, was 38. She was an estate attorney. Sharp, methodical, the kind of woman who read contracts the way other people read novels. She had always been in Elaine's shadow, not because Elaine put her there, but because Diane had chosen it, standing just close enough to the light to stay warm, without ever having to generate any of her own. The cause of death was listed as hypertensive crisis. Sudden, catastrophic, no prior diagnosis. The kind of thing that happens to people who work too hard and sleep too little, the doctor said. Elaine had been found unresponsive in her home office on a Tuesday morning in February. Marcus had called 911. By the time the paramedics arrived, she was gone. I stood in the front of Serenity Chapel on Meeting Street, watching my son-in-law work the room. He shook hands. He accepted embraces. He arranged his face into the correct expression at the correct moments, with the precision of a man who had rehearsed. Diane moved 2 steps behind him, touching his elbow every few minutes, steering him from one cluster of mourners to the next. They were not grieving. They were networking. I had read enough guilty faces to know the difference. Pastor Ellis from Calvary AME, a man who had officiated more funerals than I could count, stood at the podium and spoke about Elaine's spirit, her laughter, her commitment to preserving the history of this city. She was Charleston, he said. She was the best of what we built here. My brother, Arthur Calloway, 65, stood beside me in the back pew. He had been a forensic accountant for 30 years before he retired. He looked at Marcus the way I looked at defendants who thought they were smarter than the courtroom. They rehearsed this, Arthur said quietly. I know, I said. The casket was white oak. Elaine had chosen white oak for the floors of the Trad Street property when she restored it 4 years ago. She said the grain told a story if you knew how to look at it. She had spent 6 months sourcing the right timber. Marcus had wanted engineered hardwood. He said it was more cost-effective. Elaine had won. When the service ended and most of the mourners had filtered toward the reception hall, Marcus came to stand beside me at the casket. Diane positioned herself 2 feet behind him. He put his hand on my shoulder. Raymond, he said, using my first name the way he always did when he wanted to remind me he considered us equals. I want you to know that Elaine's vision for the company is safe with us. Every property, every contract, everything she built, Diane and I are going to carry it forward. You don't have to worry about a single thing. I turned to look at him. His expression was generous, sympathetic, the face of a man doing you a favor by relieving you of a burden. She built that company from nothing, I said. And we'll honor that, Marcus said. Then, lower. You're 63 years old, Raymond. You've earned your rest. Let the next generation handle it. End. That was when I heard it. A laugh. Low, warm, knowing. Coming from inside the casket. The laugh of a woman who had just heard exactly what she needed to hear. Marcus's face went white. His hand dropped from my shoulder. Diane's fingers locked around his arm. "We should go," she said. Her voice was flat. She did not look at the casket. She pulled Marcus toward the exit with the efficiency of someone who had planned for this possibility. I stood alone beside the white oak casket. My hands rested on the edge of the cool, smooth wood. If Elaine was dead, what had I just heard? And if she was not dead, where was my daughter? The chapel emptied slowly. I waited. The last mourners passed, offering touches on my arm and quiet words about God's plan that I heard without absorbing. When the room was finally quiet except for the rain against the tall windows and the distant sounds of the reception hall, I moved closer. Thomas Beaumont, the funeral director, a thin man in his 60s who had buried 3 generations of Charleston families, approached from the side door. "Mr. Calloway," he said, "take all the time you need." He left me alone with my daughter. I looked at the woman in that casket. The face was Elaine's. The bone structure, the arrangement of the hair, the navy dress she had worn to the closing of the Lagare Street restoration 2 years ago, all of it was Elaine. 200 people had filed past without question. But I had read 10,000 faces in 34 years on the federal bench. I touched her hand. The skin was wrong. Too smooth, too uniform. The callus on Elaine's right index finger from the pen she had used since law school gone. I ran my fingers along the interior silk lining of the casket near her left shoulder. My hand stopped. Something hard, small, rectangular. I pressed gently and felt a speaker grill still faintly warm from recent use. Someone had planted a recording device. Someone had triggered Elaine's laugh remotely, timed perfectly for the moment Marcus revealed himself. Someone wanted me to hear that. Someone wanted Marcus to panic. I slipped the device into my coat pocket. Then I found the interior breast pocket of the navy dress, the hidden pocket Elaine had insisted on when she had the dress tailored. The pocket I had teased her about because she said a woman always needed somewhere to keep things that mattered. Folded paper. Heavy stock. Cream colored. Elaine's handwriting. Confident, forward slanting. The capital E, with its deliberate serif that she had developed in high school and never changed. "The woman in this casket is not me. Find Priya's files, Daddy. Magnolia Storage, Unit 9. Come tonight. Bring Uncle Arthur." I read it 4 times. "The woman in this casket is not me." I folded the note and pressed it against my chest. Magnolia Storage was on Savannah Highway, south of the Ashley River. I had driven past it 100 times without ever stopping. Industrial district, mostly contractors and marine equipment. Unit 9. I thought about what she had written. Find Priya's files. Priya Nair was 31 years old. She had been a junior accountant at Calloway Properties for 14 months. Elaine had hired her straight out of a graduate program at the College of Charleston. Smart, thorough, the kind of young woman who actually read footnotes. 3 weeks ago, she had been found dead in her apartment. Ruled accidental prescription medication. Cardiac complications, the medical examiner had said. She had no history of cardiac issues. She had been asking too many questions about wire transfers. And now her name was in a note from my possibly living daughter. I walked out of the chapel into February rain. Arthur was waiting by my car. "Drive," I said. "Where?" "Savannah Highway. And Arthur, bring your forensic eye." Arthur met me outside Unit 9 at 9 that night. The storage facility was all sodium, light, and fog. The the kind of February cold that came off the Ashley River and settled in your bones. He pulled his camera from his bag without being asked. 30 years of documenting financial crime had made preparation automatic. He photographed the lock, the door, the unit number. Then I fitted the small brass key that had been folded inside Elaine's note, and the lock turned smoothly. The door swung open. Cold hit us like a wall. Industrial cold, the kind designed for commercial refrigeration. Inside, on an aluminum platform, was a young woman, laid out with care. Dark hair arranged around her shoulders, hands folded across her chest. I knew her face, Priya Nair. Arthur exhaled slowly beside me and started documenting. She had been dead for 3 weeks while Elaine had been alive. The medical examiner had ruled Priya's death accidental without question, and someone had kept her here, preserved, waiting to be buried as Elaine Calloway-Marsh. On the shelf above her, a manila envelope, my name written on it in Elaine's handwriting. Inside, a USB drive, 4 photographs, and a handwritten timeline. The photographs were dated over 4 months. The first showed Priya sitting across from Marcus at a restaurant on Upper King Street. Documents between them, her expression serious, and his pleasant in the way of a man closing something. The second showed Diane on her phone at the same table while Marcus leaned toward Priya. The third showed Priya standing to leave, holding papers, and Marcus's expression had shifted, no longer pleasant. Something harder underneath it. The fourth photograph showed Priya alone, outside the offices of a whistleblower attorney on Broad Street, dated 3 days before she died. Arthur lowered the camera. She went to get help, and they found out, I said. Arthur was already calling a contact, a former colleague at the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit in Colombia. He spoke quietly, gave our location, and hung up. They're sending someone tonight, he said. Eugene, this is federal. I looked at Priya Nair's face on that aluminum platform. 31 years old. She had done her job too well, found something wrong, tried to go through proper channels, and paid for it with her life. Her name was going to mean something before this was over. I was going to make sure of it. By 7 the next morning, Arthur and I were in a conference room at the Medical University of South Carolina, requesting the intake records for Elaine Calloway-Marsh. The records clerk pulled the file. Arthur read the intake notes with the same focused stillness he brought to fraudulent balance sheets. Core temperature at intake, he said quietly, 31.4 degrees Fahrenheit. I had spent enough time around refrigerated evidence facilities in 34 years on the federal bench to understand what that number meant. She was refrigerated before Marcus delivered her, I said. Arthur pointed to a handwritten note in the margin. A junior attending physician had flagged the temperature inconsistency. The chief medical examiner, a doctor, Garfield Pruitt, had overridden it within an hour. No additional examination ordered. Cause of death confirmed as hypertensive crisis. Pruitt, I said. The name landed somewhere familiar. He's been chief ME for 9 years, Arthur said. Before that, Johns Hopkins faculty. He paused. Raymond, wasn't he at Elaine's wedding? I closed my eyes. The memory arrived clear and specific. Garfield Pruitt, at the reception at Middleton Place, laughing at something Elaine had said. The ease between them of 2 people who had known each other for years. Elaine's graduate advisor from her continuing education coursework. They had stayed close. My daughter's death certificate had been signed by her friend. Either Garfield Pruitt was complicit in her murder, or he was complicit in something else entirely. Arthur was already composing an email to his FBI contact. I was beginning to understand that Elaine had not been a victim of this conspiracy. She had been orchestrating its unraveling from the inside. That evening, we sat in Arthur's home office on Rutledge Avenue with the USB drive, a pot of coffee, and the kind of silence that comes before you learn something permanent. Arthur inserted the drive. 3 folders: emails, transfers, audio. He opened the emails first. Dozens of threads organized by date, earliest in October, most recent 3 days before the funeral. The language was coded but clear to anyone who had spent a career reading financial crime. References to the asset transition, removing the complication, the accounting problem, discussions about timeline, about offshore structures, about ensuring the old man would not interfere. The old man was me. Arthur opened the transfers folder. Spreadsheets, wire records. 14 months of transactions from Calloway Properties, accounts operations, client escrow, restoration reserves to 3 destination accounts in the Cayman Islands, all registered to shell corporations. The total, $2.3 million. Priya found this, I said. Every cent of it, Arthur confirmed. He moved to the audio folder. 6 recordings, dated across 4 months. He clicked the earliest, static, then voices. Marcus's voice came first, clear and unhurried. Once the complication is handled, we move on the old man's interest. Raymond trusts Diane completely. She processes the estate documents. We're in by March. A woman's voice responded. My younger daughter's voice. The voice I had heard asking for bedtime stories at age 6, asking to borrow my car at 16, giving a toast at Elaine's wedding that made half the room cry. Raymond's health isn't great, Diane said. High blood pressure, borderline diabetes. If his condition deteriorates, no one asks questions. I know his pharmacist. Arthur stopped the recording. The room was completely still. He clicked the final file, dated February 10th, 11 days before the funeral. Marcus. Pruitt confirmed the documentation will hold. Once we execute, we have 48 hours before Raymond starts asking the wrong questions. Diane. He won't ask questions. He'll grieve. That's what he does. He'll sit in that house and think about what he lost, and by the time he looks up, everything will already be transferred. A pause. Marcus. And Priya? Diane. Priya is already handled. Arthur closed the laptop. He picked up his phone and dialed without asking me. Agent Simmons. It's Arthur Calloway. We have recorded confessions, financial records, a murdered witness, and a falsified death certificate. We need the full unit, tonight. I sat in the leather chair across from him and looked out at Charleston's winter dark. Somewhere in this city, Marcus and Diane were asleep, believing their plan was working precisely as designed. Believing Elaine was buried, that Priya was forgotten, that the old judge would grieve himself into irrelevance before spring. I thought about Elaine in March, buying the recording device, writing the note, leaving me breadcrumbs she knew I would follow because she knew how I thought, because she had watched me work for 30 years. My daughter had been building this case while they were building their conspiracy. She had been 3 steps ahead from the very first day. 2 days after the funeral, Diane called me. Daddy. Her voice was soft. Concerned? I'm worried about Marcus. The way he's talking about the company, I don't think it's what Elaine would have wanted. I think we need to work together to protect her legacy. I had spent 34 years listening to people say one thing while meaning another. Come to the house, I said. Saturday morning. She arrived at 10, dressed in gray cashmere, minimal jewelry, the picture of composed grief. She sat at the kitchen table, where she had done homework as a child, and wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. Marcus is moving too fast, she said. He's talking about liquidating the Trad Street property, the Lagare Street restoration. Elaine spent years on those buildings. It's wrong. I watched her hands, perfectly steady, not a tremor. What are you proposing? I asked. An alliance, she said simply. You have controlling interest in the family trust. I have legal access to the estate documents. Together we can stop him from destroying what Elaine built. Real family, Daddy, not someone who married in. There it was, the pitch. She was testing whether I knew anything about Priya, about the USB drive, about the recordings in which her own voice had discussed my death with clinical detachment. I need time, I said. She's barely been gone a week. Of course, Diane said immediately. She reached across the table and covered my hand with hers. Her skin was warm. No tremor. Not once in 45 minutes had her voice caught on her sister's name. Not once had she paused for a real memory. She spoke about Elaine the way you reference a closed account. Something that had existed, served its purpose, and been resolved. She left at noon, kissing my cheek at the door, promising she was on my side. I called Arthur before her car had turned the corner. Saturday lunch, I said. FBI office. Bring everything. That Saturday, Arthur and I walked the full evidence into a conference room at the FBI's Columbia field office. Special Agent Danielle Simmons, mid-40s, sharp and unhurried, laid everything on the table and reviewed it in precise silence. The USB drive, Priya's photographs. The toxicology report Arthur had commissioned from a private lab in Atlanta on a tea Diane had brought me at Thanksgiving. The lab had found elevated digoxin levels. The same tea had been sitting on my counter since November. The sympathy meal Diane had delivered the evening of the funeral had contained a separate bottle she had specifically recommended for my blood pressure. Arthur had tested that too. Danielle set down the lab report. Her jaw was tight. "You tested it before you drank it," she said. "I had a plant," I said. "Elaine gave it to me for my birthday. Peace lily. Beautiful thing." "Where is it now?" "Dead," I said. "I poured the tea over the soil the morning after the funeral. By Thursday, the leaves had gone black." Danielle made a note. Then she looked at me directly. "Mr. Calloway, I need to ask you something." "Go ahead." "Where is your daughter right now?" I had been waiting for that question. "I don't know exactly," I said, "but she's alive, and she's been watching." "How do you know?" "Because at the funeral home, when I went back to sign the final paperwork, a young woman in a staff uniform brought me coffee. Black. No sugar." I paused. "I have taken my coffee that way for 40 years. Elaine learned to make it when she was 11 years old, bringing it to me on Saturday mornings when she came to Chambers with me." Danielle wrote carefully. "And," I said, when she walked past me in the hallway, she pressed her thumb against my palm. "Once. Firm. Deliberate. A signal? One we made up when she was 7 years old and scared of thunderstorms. One press means, I'm safe. 2 presses means, find me. 3 means, danger." Danielle looked at me for a long moment. "Your daughter planned this with federal immunity," she said. "She's been under protected witness status since November." "Dr. Pruitt helped her," I said. "Dr. Pruitt cooperated fully with this office from the beginning," Danielle confirmed. "He created the documentation under FBI supervision and received prosecutorial immunity. The woman in that casket has been positively identified as Priya Nair, murdered by thallium poisoning administered at a dinner meeting with Marcus Marsh on October 22nd. The same poison, the same method. Marcus had practiced on Priya before he tried it on me." "When do you arrest them?" Arthur asked. "Warrants are ready," Danielle said. "Wednesday morning, 6 a.m. simultaneous." Marcus had called an emergency board meeting for Tuesday at noon. He stood at the head of the conference table in Calloway Properties offices on Broad Street and presented transition documents with the confidence of a man who believed the endgame was already written. Asset transfers. Operational authority. A restructuring plan that eliminated every board protection Elaine had built into the company charter. I sat at the far end of the table. The retired patriarch, invited as a courtesy, Marcus couldn't refuse without raising questions. "I want to acknowledge," Marcus said, his voice carrying the warmth of a man genuinely moved, "that Elaine would want us to move forward. She built this for the future, not for grief." He distributed signature packets. Board members reached for pens. I reached for mine. On page 6, where the asset transfer clause should have been, was a durable power of attorney granting me full legal authority over Marcus Marsh's personal assets, his accounts, his properties, his investments effective upon his signature. Marcus signed page 6 without reading it. He had signed away everything he owned to the father-in-law he believed was too broken with grief to be dangerous. Arthur's hand rested on his notary seal. The board meeting ended at 2. By 2:15, Marcus and Diane were shaking hands with board members, accepting condolences, making plans. Diane caught my eye across the room and smiled. The smile of a woman who believed she had won. I smiled back. 22 hours. Wednesday at 6 in the morning, Special Agent Danielle Simmons arrived at Marcus's home on South Battery with 3 agents and federal warrants. Diane was arrested at her condo on East Bay Street at the same moment. Arthur called me at 6:18. "It's done," he said. I was already dressed. I drove to Serenity Chapel on Meeting Street to sign the final cremation paperwork for Priya Nair, to restore her name to her body, to make sure she was returned to her family in Columbia with the dignity she had been denied. I was in Thomas Beaumont's office signing the last form when a staff member knocked softly and entered carrying 2 cups of coffee. Young woman, late 30s, staff uniform. Hair pulled back simply. She set one cup beside Thomas and placed the second directly in front of me without making eye contact. "Just the way you take it, sir," she said. "Black. No sugar." Thomas looked up. "I didn't order complimentary service for family appointments," she said, and moved toward the door. As she passed me in the narrow space beside Thomas's desk, her thumb pressed against my palm. One press. I am safe. I kept my face completely still until she was gone. Thomas was already reviewing the next form, noticing nothing. My daughter had been here the whole time. She had watched the investigation, the arrests, the board meeting. She had been close enough to bring me coffee while I signed papers to give Priya Nair her name back. 3 days later, Elaine walked into the FBI press conference in a simple gray suit and stood at the podium in front of 30 reporters and cameras and said her own name out loud for the first time in 3 months. "My name is Elaine Calloway-Marsh," she said. "I entered federal witness protection in November after discovering that my husband had murdered a member of my staff and was planning to murder my father. I am alive. The system worked, and Priya Nair deserved better than to be forgotten." The cameras flashed. Questions erupted. Elaine stepped back from the microphone, walked past the front row where I was seated, and did not stop. But her hand grazed mine as she passed. One press. "I am safe." Sentencing came in April. Marcus received 38 years at FCI Cumberland, no parole. He stood when Judge Patricia Wren read the sentence and said nothing. He looked at me across the courtroom with an expression that had finally run out of performance. "I thought you were the obstacle," he said as the marshals moved toward him. "You were looking at the wrong person the whole time," I said. Diane received 12 years at FCI Alderson after cooperating fully. She gave federal investigators every account number, every password, every offshore shell company structure. She gave them Marcus's personal recording from the night he administered the poison to Priya. She gave them everything she had. And then she sat in the courtroom and wept, without making a sound, when Judge Wren read the sentence. Arthur called me from the courthouse. "After sentencing," he said, "they gave her one phone call. She picked up the receiver, held it, and put it back down without dialing." 3 minutes of silence, staring at a keypad. My younger daughter, realizing there was no one left. I did not write. I probably never would. But I thought about her for a long time that night, sitting on the porch of my house on Wentworth Street, listening to rain come in off the harbor. I thought about the child she had been before she chose wrong at every turn. Some bridges burn past rebuilding. Some choices don't get unmade. I had established the Priya Nair Memorial Scholarship 2 weeks before sentencing $30,000 annually to a first-generation accounting student at the College of Charleston. Priya's parents drove up from Beaufort for the signing. Her mother held the framed documentation with both hands and looked at me for a long moment, without speaking. "She was trying to do right," I finally said. "She always was," her mother said. The morning after sentencing, I drove to the Battery and walked out to the waterfront railing. February had become April without asking permission. The harbor was busy, with early traffic, a container ship moving toward the port, a tugboat working the channel, gulls overhead, turning slow circles in the morning light. Footsteps on the boardwalk behind me. I knew the rhythm of them. Elaine appeared at the railing beside me. She was carrying 2 paper cups. She handed me one. Black, no sugar. We stood in silence for a while. The harbor moved around us, indifferent to everything we had survived. "You knew I would follow the breadcrumbs," I said. "I knew you would follow anything that pointed to the truth," she said. "You spent 34 years doing exactly that. You let me think you were dead." "I let the people who wanted me dead think I was dead," she said. "There's a difference." A cargo ship cleared the harbor mouth and disappeared toward open water. The bell buoy clanged somewhere past the breakwater. The same sound it had made the morning of the funeral, when I had stood at a graveside and believed I was burying my child. "What now?" I asked. Elaine wrapped both hands around her coffee cup and looked out at the water. "I'm starting something smaller. Consulting. Historic preservation, coastal properties. Nothing that needs to be defended with 8 months of evidence collection." "And Marcus's appeal?" "Let him file," she said. 38 years is 38 years. A bell buoy rang again. The sound carried across the water, steady and ordinary, exactly what it had always been. "Priya's scholarship," Elaine said quietly. "That was right, Daddy." "She deserved more than a footnote in a federal case file," I said. Elaine nodded. She was quiet for a moment, and then the harbor horn from the container ship caught her off guard, and she laughed sudden, genuine, free. The same laugh that had come from inside that casket and sent Marcus stumbling backward into the roses. The laugh of a woman 3 steps ahead. "That horn," she said, still smiling. "Your grandfather used to say the harbor never apologizes," I said. "Just keeps moving." She looked at me then, really looked. The gray-green eyes she had inherited from her mother. A face that carried 3 months of living as someone else, of watching her own funeral from a distance, of trusting that her father would follow every breadcrumb she had left. "Breakfast?" she asked. "There's a place on East Bay," I said. "Best grits in Charleston." We walked away from the water together, father and daughter, rebuilt on truth instead of secrets, carrying the weight of what we had survived and the knowledge of what it had cost. To you listening to this story, family, hear me when I say this. Betrayal doesn't announce itself. It does not arrive wearing a stranger's face. It comes in tailored suits and concerned voices and coffee cups handed to you by people who know exactly how you take it. It wears the face of love while it measures what you're worth. But truth surfaces. It always does. And the people who plant breadcrumbs for you, who press one finger against your palm to say, "I am safe," those are the ones who love you past the performance. Those are your real family. If this story moved you, drop a comment and tell me, would you have forgiven Diane? Would you trust again after something like this? Share this with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you're not already with us, subscribe and stay close. More stories about truth, justice, and the price of loyalty are coming. Thank you for staying until the end. Your time means something to me. Some details in this story have been changed for storytelling and to protect those involved. What remains true is the lesson. I hope you carry it with you.